One who serves in Shoshanna. Censorship OWSO Mani Padme Hum. O Mani Padme Hum. Om. Greetings. One who serves here in Shoshanna is here, and what a wonderful message from Ashta himself to be able to share and be here with you in this understanding of who you are becoming and what you are here to do, and to give a little bit different vantage point from the point of view of those of your brothers and sisters from the stars. Or I should say our brothers and sisters from the stars, because we are all brothers and sisters and we all came from those very stars. We are ready for your questions if you have them. Any questions out there? Member, I have a question. I was just wondering that there is so much censoring, and I was wondering how is that now? I know it's 5G. There was a lot of assimilation of what people were saying and stuff like that over the wires. But what is how much censorship and control is being through phone lines, etc.? Does that make sense? Censorship and accumulation of what people are talking about by AI. Is that still going on? OWS, we are going to tell you this, and we hope that you understand what we are giving here. Please understand that everything you are hearing, whether it resonates or does not resonate to you, is not so important that you focus on every little thing that you hear that comes up in your conversations, in your readings, in your watching, which you call podcasts or whatever it might be. Understand that there are many different points of view as to how this ascension process is going to play out, and how the political situation is going to play out, and how the disclosure process is going to play out, and all of these things. Do not become attached to any one viewpoint that comes from these various ones that are bringing these views forward. Always, whenever you hear these various things or read about them, use your discernment. See what resonates to you, what feels right to you, and then go with that. But do not become involved. If something is of fear, then it does not resonate with you, and therefore you would not want to believe in that fear-mongering process, or that is still continuing to happen. And we will continue for a bit yet, but know that it is largely, at this point, coming under control by those of the White House Alliance that is working on this, to bring about the changes that are necessary to keep you away from having to continue to have the various fears and control issues that you are speaking of here. Okay. Shoshanna, do you have anything you want to add? Shoshanna, we would like to add our perspective to you, sister. We find that what you call the two movements is alive and well and flourishing. There are more followers now than there ever were. And there is much less censorship. There are pockets of censorship in what you call your mainstream news. That seems to always be there. But there is much freedom now on many platforms that you find that you can listen to that have released information and have released the truth. And when you are a truth seeker, honestly, you find the truth no matter where it might lead you, because the censorship does not resonate to you. But you will find it because you are seeking it. Seek and you shall find. As to censorship, it has much lessened over the last 5 years. And there is more truth being told now than there ever has been culturally in your country. Namaste. OWS, very good. Are there further questions here? Member, I'll ask a question. I hope it's not redundant. But there's so much information or lack of information on both stories regarding the Charlie Kirk assassination. Whether his life was involved, whether he's alive, whether he's dead. Are we ever going to find out the truth, or is it going to go under the rug with the FBI and everything and we'll never know? Can you shed some light on this, please? OWS, without being involved into specifics here, we will tell you the answer to your question is yes. You will know. You will know not only that, but you will know about the Kennedy assassination. You will know about the landing on the moon. All of these things that you have wondered about that have been a part of the control and fear process by those of the, what you call, the elites or the cabal. And all of this will be coming to truth eventually here. It is happening more and more. More and more truth is coming forward. We have likened this before to a dam bursting in terms of first there are various pinholes in that dam, allowing for the water to come through or the waters of truth to come through here for the light to shine through. And then more and more of those pinholes begin to open larger and larger and larger, allowing more and more truth and light to come through. Eventually, the entire dam will be no more. It will completely dissolve or disintegrate or be washed through by the flood of truth coming forward. And also know, though, when you are in that ascension process and coming closer and closer to the full ascension, all of your remembrances will return to you. And at that point, you will know the entire truth of the universe at that point. Okay. Shoshanna. Well, we will give a perspective here if we may, dear sister. Yes, we will quote the X-File. The truth is out there. Almost there. OWS, very good. Would there be other questions here before we release? Channel? Member, I have a little question. I've been contemplating the ballroom that Trump is having privately funded. And as I think about that ballroom and hear the music and see the dancing, there are many that are dancing that have been told, have crossed over. And they have been actually the actors and actresses that have taken on these roles. Is that going to develop before the end of Trump's current years of presidency? I'm asking if the people that have taken on roles as actors and actresses in America and perhaps other places will be brought forward so that people will see them as being not dead, not dark, not hidden any longer, that we can honor them for the roles that they have played, that in truth, they will be celebrated in a way for what they have done. Politicians or actors or players or actors? OWS answer to your question is yes. There will come a time where again the truth will set you all free. So, you will know that truth, whether it is those who have played their role as the dark side or the light side, whatever it might be, all to bring about the ascension process that is in the works here. It is all about that. Everything is leading to that. Now there, of course, are those of the dark forces that will need to and are in the process of being taken out of the picture more and more. And that must occur because for the truth to come through more and more fully, then those that are hiding the truth and would continue to hide that truth will need to be out of the picture. Shoshanna, do you have anything to add? Shoshanna, yes. We have something here to contribute if we may, dear sister. We will tell you that your understanding is much like a premonition, much like seeing into the future. And we will tell you that this building that your President Trump is calling the ballroom has much more significance than just the building. What we will tell you is that the one Trump himself does not really understand why he is pushing for this, why he is building it. He is being guided to build this building. He is being overlit to build this building. His higher self is pushing him towards this, but as a man, as a third-dimensional being, he does not truly have the understanding of why he is doing this. He just knows he must do it. And that is what is occurring. There are much bigger plans for this building, this ballroom, than any of us really could know at this point. We will just tell you that the plans are much bigger and you are onto it, sister. OWS, very good. Think of it in terms of councils moving forward here, away from big government as it is and into many various councils helping to raise the consciousness of the planet to the point where it can be one with the galactic brothers and sisters. We are ready to move on if there are any other questions. Member, well, I just have a similar question. So, my heart goes out for the warrior Candace and she is doing such great work. She is coming to the conclusion that the FBI were involved. She is just not coming to the conclusion that they actually saved his life instead of killed it. She is getting a lot of flack from the whole thing is being split up, the MAGA if you will, be split up because there are two factions. So, I know this will come to a resolution but I just really have a desire to see this one. I just think she is a being of light. I just like to see her exonerated and like sort of similar to what was being said about the others. You know. Will that happen? OWS, we will tell you she is playing a role just as many are doing, playing the roles, and the actors, the actresses, the ones that are working to bring this entire process forward. Again, in whatever way they are doing that. And again, that will all come to understanding and truth coming forward here. Shoshanna, do you have any feedback? Shoshanna, yes. We will add something here if we may. We must keep in mind that the light and the dark are still at war. They are still fighting each other. There is darkness, there is light, and when you call this one a light being, it is because she is on the side of light. She is shining a light. It is not popular yet, but it is gaining popularity as one shines a light. And yes, she is playing a role as you are, as we are, and she is playing the role of warrior for the light. So, whether the system that is not a truthful system, not a system of clarity, exoneration is not relevant to see. That is not relevant. Then we are playing with their dimensional rules and that is not who we are. So, you must see her as the warrior that she is and you are and not be concerned if the system exonerates her or not because the system is not the truth. We hope that helps. Namaste. OWS, very good. Again, we are needing to release channel here now. Shoshanna, do you have any parting message? Shoshanna, we will just say that all of those that are part of our group must continue to seek the truth and know the truth and be the truth and live the truth. Namaste. OWS, very good. And we would echo what Ashta said and what others have said and we have been saying for quite some time now. Find within yourself that power that is within you, that has always been within you, and recognize that it is there be able to take you forward in every moment as you continue to move through this ascension process as an individual and as a collective consciousness. Shanti. Peace be with you. Be the one. Tunia. Most people are in survival mode, my dearest brothers and sisters. This is Tunia speaking. I love you so very much. To recap part 1. People who don't have their needs met for a long time go into survival mode. After all, needs are needs, and survival mode is an emergency way to try and meet your needs, any way you can. If it's psychological needs that aren't being met, then people go into psychological survival mode, where they discard truth and morality and empathy, and instead they believe whatever helps them meet their psychological needs. Okay, let's get a discussion on one particular topic out of the way first. This topic will be relevant later during this message, and by tackling it first, it won't break up the flow later. On Hitler, some people think that Hitler did nothing wrong. It's hard for this channeler to write about Hitler because he lives in the Netherlands, where freedom of speech isn't nearly as strong as it is in America, and certain laws are quite harsh and restrictive. With that said, the Hitler did nothing wrong. He was perfectly justified in everything narrative genuinely isn't true. It's not justified to mistreat all Jews just because some Jews had a lot of international influence / did bad things. If you want to argue that Nazi gas chambers didn't exist, well, it's undeniable that Jews were still put into camps, including ones who themselves did nothing wrong. And even that isn't morally acceptable. Suppose that someone objectively proved that some Americans, purely hypothetically, let's say Bill Gates and Fauci and Bush and a few others, wielded a lot of international influence and hurt a whole lot of people, including people from other nations. Then would you support someone rounding up and putting innocent Americans into camps for several years? This whole round up people because others in their ethnic group have international influence / do bad things idea doesn't sound so benign when your group is the one targeted, does it? Plus, communists were put into camps too, and obviously it's not justified to put people into camps purely for thought crime. Hitler also killed people with disabilities. Hitler invaded 7 neutral countries. Clearly, well, it benefits me, isn't enough justification to conquer a neutral country. For example, Denmark and Norway weren't secretly plotting to invade Germany. Nazi Germany also made deals with negative extraterrestrials, which again doesn't fit with the Hitler did nothing wrong narrative. Another related narrative is that in the present day, Jews secretly run the world. That's not true. Dark controllers run the world, but they're not a Jewish group. Israelis were subjected to the COVID shot too, and a percentage of them died. If you think they somehow got a benign injection, go to yandex.com and search for Israelis deaths COVID vaccination or similar. So the world isn't secretly run by Jews, for Jews. Yes, AIPAC and certain other Jewish organizations and individuals have an outsized influence in Washington. Yes, Americans have every right to oppose that. However, that doesn't prove that Jews secretly run the world. The US has 350-ish million people, yet it has an outsized influence over the world, which has a population in the billions. And certain countries have / had policies that are more favorable for the US than for their own populations, similar to America prioritizing Israel's interests. Does that prove that the world is run by a secret American cabal? Not really, right? Okay, so that also debunks the argument that Jews secretly run the world. With that said, what we've discussed so far will become relevant later. We'll now go to the main part of the message, where we look in depth at a specific group that is in survival mode, to further explore what survival mode looks like. Young men. Unlike previous generations, young men are in survival mode. Let's list some reasons for that. They see that their society is declining very fast and no one has a realistic plan to stop that. The current thought leader of young men is Nick Fuentes, who at 27 says women are very difficult to be around. Source: https://www.youtube.com/short/xsw0pmoa. Nick Fuentes is a no-sex before marriage Catholic who hasn't found his partner yet, and is thus virgin. From young men's perspective, you go girl boss, feminism, social media, Tinder, TikTok, become a career woman, Trump supporters are Nazis, men are evil, women are oppressed, etc. messaging have turned most young women into some kind of nasty, delusional far-left creature. Older women aren't nearly as unreasonable, because they didn't grow up with smartphones. To be clear, I don't think this is fair. Young men are in survival mode, after all, and people in survival mode aren't fair. However, I think that this perspective is closer to being fair than most people realize. In my Tunia, Female Supremacism series, I argued that society is female supremacist, and consequently, many young women are female supremacists. This sounds outrageous, but this statement is actually really hard to argue against if you logically consider the argument I outlined in those messages. Plus, well, young women are in survival mode and anyone in survival mode becomes unreasonable. Still, I can't blame young men for not wanting to date a female supremacist. And when most young women are female supremacists, then obviously dating becomes a nightmare. If you're not currently an average young man who is currently interacting with young women in 2025, then you have no idea what that's like. If you're a slightly older person, things today really aren't as they were before smartphones and the COVID lockdowns. Your experience doesn't apply. The world has changed. Thinking that young men can surely find a reasonable-minded girlfriend if they just do this and this, is like saying that young men can surely walk up to the local factory and give the boss a firm handshake, and then buy a house 2 years later. It's just not reality anymore. More than 60% of young men are single, nearly twice the rate of unattached young women, who are dating older men or sharing top men, which is more common than you may realize. Source https://theheld.com/blog/briefing-room/3868557-most-young-men-are-single-most-young-women-are-not, and of course, if less than 40% of young men are in relationships at all, then a substantially lower percentage is in relationships that are stable, happy, functional, and that are going to last a long time. Women initiate most divorces. From a young man's perspective, good women exist, but there are few of them. Hence they're picky, because why wouldn't they be? Hence they're out of reach of average guys. Women usually won't date poorer men, but meanwhile white men are getting discriminated against during hiring processes, and by teachers when they grade papers. Which is obviously unfair, and this means men have a really hard time getting a decent girlfriend. Or buying a house. In fact, every year houses become more expensive and therefore get further out of reach of young men. Meanwhile, men are getting demonized even if they do nothing wrong. They get called Nazis for supporting Trump when Trump won the popular vote last election. So basically they have the most common opinion in the country, yet get called Nazi over that. Young men face discrimination, yet are told they're privileged. Every group is allowed to work for their own benefit, but when white men try to do that, they're called white supremacists. Also, COVID lockdowns destroyed their mental health during a pivotal time in their development. Also, if AI fails, then the stock market will be hurt severely, because AI doing well is priced in. That means that companies will put in a hiring freeze and stop hiring young men. Plus you might get an economic crisis with an intensity of the one in 2008. Whereas if AI succeeds, then companies will replace young men with AI. So AI companies are flipping a coin, and both sides say, young men lose. And obviously young men aren't going to retire in 5 years. Even if AI only gets really good 20 years from now, well, then men still lose. Not very motivating, is it? Furthermore, young men idolized Charlie Kirk, who got murdered. Young men put their hopes into Trump. And the person pretending to be Trump can reasonably be said to have betrayed the America First agenda. And young men put their hopes into Jordan Peterson, who disappointed them as well. See https://www.youtube.com/watch?v=sign or 58kwreb4 for details if you're interested. So, no wonder young men are in survival mode. Now, some young men are left-wing. However, the left is very hostile to men, discriminating against them while falsely claiming that is justified because men are privileged. They're not. Hence, most young men, and certainly most strong and self-respecting young men, are right-wing. If the left doesn't like this, stop discriminating against and demonizing men. As a result of all this, young men want to dramatically change the country so that it works again in general, and especially for them in particular. They're in survival mode, so the concerns of other groups, such as women, are a lower priority for them. I'm not saying that's justified, I'm just saying that's what's happening. Installing the backup. So, what do you do when your computer has all kinds of weird glitches, and you don't know how to fix it? Well, you install a backup, from an earlier moment in time when your computer clearly worked. Install the backup is a very sensible problem-solving solution. Similarly, young men want to install the backup of society. This is a term I invented, not a term they use, but I think it fits. The goal is to revert society back to a place when it clearly worked. That may sound horrifying, but it's not a bad problem-solving solution. And currently there is no proven alternative. Sure, everyone says, implement my agenda and that will fix everything. But those claims are often contradictory, and none of those claims are proven. There have been endless policies that were widely hyped up at the time, but they turned out to not fix things or even make things worse. From that perspective, experimenting with unproven policies seems quite reckless. After all, people are desperate and lives are at stake. Installing the backup could be seen as the responsible thing to do. So what does this actually mean? Roughly speaking, the backup that young men want to install is white patriarchy. That's what they want to go back to. A problem with saying the word patriarchy is that different people define the word wildly differently. Depending on definition, either the US has literally never been a patriarchy, or the US has literally always been a patriarchy and it's still one today. So let's be more specific. Not all young men have the same views, but many think along the lines of, Women don't get to vote anymore. Jewish influence is heavily curtailed. Every non-white person whose deportation can be reasonably justified is deported. However, a non-criminal minority person who has been living here sufficiently long isn't deported, and gets to have full rights. After that, immigration is restricted, with the goal being to keep the country largely white. The US and Europe for most of their history didn't let women vote, were more patriarchal than today, were skeptical of Jews and were overwhelmingly mono-ethnic, i.e. white. Hence, young men want to install the backup, and basically go back to that. Because it worked. Women back then were happier than young women are today. And of course, from young men's perspective, it doesn't hurt that installing the backup of white patriarchy would put them at the top. I'm not saying young men aren't being self-serving. The current thought leader among young men is Nick Fuentes, who we mentioned earlier. He's very influential among young men, source for that claim, https://www.thetimes.com/comments/columnist/article/young-men-nick-fuentes-influencer-bhs87k3p5. Let's look at Nick's basically white patriarchy agenda. Nick Fuentes openly says he's a racist, adding that he thinks everyone is racist. Source: https://www.youtube.com/short/ctmrvxqywac. He said that women should have fewer rights than men. Source: https://www.youtube.com/short/z_a4z2e6uvi. He said that women absolutely shouldn't have the right to vote. Source: first link about Nick I shared. Here it is again. https://www.youtube.com/short/xsw0pmo. Nick said, banning gay marriage is back on the menu, banning sodomy is back on the menu, banning contraceptives is back on the menu, and basically we're having something like Taliban rule in America, in a good way. We're having something like a Catholic Taliban rule in America. Source: https://x.com/rightwingwatch/status/1541451617874153472. Nick is Catholic himself. Also, Nick Fuentes said Hitler was really fucking cool. Source: https://www.youtube.com/watch?mark v=x_v.j.o.j7y_ampersand t=sign4105s. This is why we discussed Hitler earlier. He expressed skepticism whether 6 million Jews really were killed during the Holocaust. That said, Nick also said that housing and public transport should be affordable. Source: https://youtube.be/vqsdzjisn_q?t=1349. Which is a left-wing position. So young men aren't far-right cartoon villains. They're a product of their environment, and they've experienced that the right-wing agenda may work for rich people and homeowners and stock owners, but they're none of those things and hence the right-wing agenda doesn't work for them. Still, overall Nick is obviously quite extreme. Most Zoomers aren't that extreme. Still, a larger group of them is more extreme than you may think. For example, Nick Fuentes was recently interviewed by Piers Morgan. Piers played a video sent in by the Jew Danny Finkelstein, who lectured Nick about the horrors of the Holocaust and the harm done to Finkelstein's family. Zoomers were not impressed and remarked, Piers dropped a tactical Jew and it backfired. Zoomers then made a meme out of the phrase "me mum died in the holly," mimicking and mocking what Danny Finkelstein said. Holly stands for Holocaust. If you search YouTube for "me mum died in the holly," you can find a dozen music videos riffing on that phrase. For example, https://www.youtube.com/watch?v=GBYXDLDT-Q, which also features a dancing Hitler. It has been watched 100,000 times or so, and comments under that video are positive. I get that the previous video is shocking to most people, and I don't approve of it, but remember, young men are in survival mode. They've been squeezed and they think the house is on fire, and they don't care about an event that happened on another continent 80 years ago. They care about what is happening today. Besides, the Americans didn't commit the Holocaust, and in fact they fought against Hitler. So why should Americans still let themselves be controlled by word spells such as, if you think this then you're a Nazi? You must prioritize the well-being of Jews because of the Holocaust, etc. Most young men aren't really invested in Hitler being cool. But if people with more power than them keep them down, and tell them they can't praise Hitler, then they'll praise Hitler out of spite. Zoomers are typically offered a binary choice. Comply with a society that hates you, that mistreats you, and that is self-destructing. Or do what you think will actually save society. But then you're Hitler. To that, Zoomers say, okay, I guess I'm Hitler then. If people don't care about young men's issues, then why should young men care about the Holocaust? Because of common decency? People aren't showing young men common decency. The Zoomer future is coming. The future may very well be substantially more in the Nick Fuentes direction than the present day is. Especially because young men currently show much more energy and vitality and a willingness to reshape society than any other group, in general. Obviously, this doesn't apply to every single individual. Older men, women, and left-wingers seem to either want to fiddle with the tax rate and social services a bit, which is like rearranging the deck chairs while the ship sinks. Or they have a utopian vision of a love-based rainbow society, which might be your medium-term future, but there's no realistic way to directly get from here to there in the short term. Then again, multiculturalism isn't guaranteed to be your future. Pleiadian worlds are 90 to 95% Pleiadian, and we're going to keep them that way. So everyone except young men has the plan of rearrange the deck chairs while the ship sinks, or let's hold hands and imagine a world where the ship isn't sinking, or let's censor the people who are trying to plug the holes and call them racist. While on the other hand, young men have the ugly, imperfect but at least functional plan of install the backup. It's not what I would do, it's not my preferred plan, but it is a functional plan. Okay, then my money is on young men. I get that people may not like this, but it's not going to work to criticize the ugly solution, while offering no realistic solution yourself, as society is burning down around you. Not taking real action isn't really an option given that your society is burning down. And I get that this doesn't conform to people's idea of a line straight upwards into New Earth. However, New Earth doesn't include anti-male discrimination. And if people just refuse to end anti-male discrimination, then the only path that's left is that eventually the Zoomer generation ends anti-male discrimination by installing the backup. Or in other words, right now women advocate for women, Jews advocate for Jews, Muslims advocate for Muslims, etc. And some people in all of these groups are working to make sure their group gets unfair privileges, and that white men are discriminated against. And young men can't convince these groups to stop advocating for themselves, and sometimes discriminating against white men, through conversation. Plus these groups aren't holding their own unfair people accountable. Additionally, some people in these groups scream white supremacist and Nazi if white men try to advocate for themselves. So effectively they're saying, we get to advocate for our group, but you don't. Then even young men who want a diverse rainbow future where everyone is included and everyone is fair to each other, can't get there, because the other groups refuse to be fair to white men. Then the only choices that young men have are everyone advocates for their own interest except white men, or everyone advocates for their own interests, which men seriously advocating for their own interests, as everyone else is already doing, may lead to white patriarchy. If people don't like white patriarchy, people can end anti-male discrimination before the Zoomers get into power. And then you won't get this kind of future. Yes, you might get bailed out by galactics, by a solar flash or by a grey hat intervention. Still, waiting for that isn't a great plan because it's unclear when those things will happen. And even when we land, we're not going to rule you or fix all your problems for you. So Earth humans are still going to have to fix their own society. Most people also won't be allowed to permanently move to a Pleiadian world. We also don't want mass immigration either. Currently young men can't implement their white patriarchy agenda because they're being held down by older men. However, older men are going to die from old age. And then younger men are going to come into power by default. You can't really prevent that. And the conditions that made Zoomers like this are going to make subsequent generations of men like that too. So don't think that Zoomers are a unique generation and the generation after them will be normal again. In fact, the generation that comes after Zoomers, namely Generation Alpha, could be even more extreme than the Zoomer generation Nick Fuentes is in. Teenage boys of Generation Alpha are currently listening to Nick Fuentes, and they're seeing how everyone just relentlessly attacks Nick, even during those times when Nick makes genuinely reasonable points, such as reasonable anti-immigration or anti-sending money to Israel points. If teenage boys see pretty much everyone attacking the 27-year-old Zoomer who has no power other than his voice, even during times when he's clearly right, then Nick looks like the heroic underdog fighting a corrupt system. Here is Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who is a Jewish millionaire, mentioning Nick Fuentes by name and denouncing him. https://www.youtube.com/watch?v =hi03pbjnwm. If you're a teenage boy and you see this, do you side with a 75-year-old Jewish establishment politician, or with a 27-year-old American underdog? This 75-year-old Jewish millionaire is sending young men's tax dollars to Israel. Israel is an ethnostate guilty of committing genocide on Palestinians. But the 75-year-old Jewish millionaire denies Israel's genocide. However, while he denies the genocide, he says that it's very harmful when young men say mean words. And also, he says that if young men want America to be for white people, that's white supremacism and the most evil thing imaginable. But if Jews want Israel to be for Jews, if Jews want Israel to be an ethnostate, then that's perfectly fine. And not just is it fine, young men's tax dollars should be sent to ethnotate Israel. An ethnostate for me. Enforced multiculturalism for thee. You racist. You white supremacist. Now excuse me while I go send your tax dollars to Israel. Says the Jew. To Americans. In America, the Jewish millionaire is allowed to deny Israel's present-day genocide. But socially speaking, young American men aren't allowed to deny the Holocaust, even though it happened 80 years ago and therefore it feels much less relevant to young men than Israel's present-day conduct. This is all just so obviously corrupt. If you're a young man, how can you not side with the young American underdog against the old, obviously hypocritical Jewish millionaire establishment politician? So I don't think young men are going to moderate, unless society dramatically changes. Role models of young men. And here's another argument for why young men probably aren't going to moderate. Years ago, groups of young men listened to Charlie Kirk. He told young men to be good Christian husbands. And recently Charlie Kirk got assassinated. Years ago, young men listened to Jordan Peterson, who said people shouldn't be forced to use transgender people's pronouns. Jordan also told young men to go and be responsible husbands. Years after that, groups of young men started listening to Andrew Tate, who told young men to go make money and sleep with lots of women, with almost everything being allowed so long as it achieves those goals. Andrew Tate has been charged with human trafficking and rape. Years after that, groups of young men are listening to Nick Fuentes, who thinks Hitler is cool and who doesn't think women should have equal rights to men. So young men went from listening to two married men saying, be good husbands, to an alleged rapist saying, go sleep with multiple women, and pretty much all means are allowed, to a virgin saying, women shouldn't have the same rights as men. So from the perspective of the average person, the people who young men are listening to are getting more and more despicable and extreme over time. Well, some people might think Tate is worse than Nick. However, both are clearly worse than Jordan and Charlie, from most people's perspective. This also illustrates that women's arguments are going to be listened to less and less in the future. A man who has a wife and daughter, Jordan, Charlie, is going to listen to women. An alleged rapist and womanizer, Andrew Tate, isn't going to listen to women nearly as much, but he still has a sexual interest in women. So that's one lever of influence that women theoretically have over him. Displease me and no sex for you. Now obviously, that's not much, especially considering the rape allegations. Obviously I disapprove of Tate. Still, Tate has one clear incentive, sex, to listen to women. That's certainly not great, but one thing is more than zero things. Speaking of which, Nick has no wife and no daughter and isn't trying to get laid, due to being a no-sex-before-marriage Catholic. And most women aren't going to like him anyway, and his reputation is already destroyed in the mainstream, so that also doesn't give him an incentive to listen to women. And from his point of view, women mistreat men, so address women's concerns because of common decency isn't going to sway him either. If you want to argue that Nick desperately wants to get laid but no woman will touch him, that's just not a reality-based statement. Sure, most women don't want to sleep with him, but some women think he's a hero for making pro-white, anti-Israel statements that almost no one else is willing to publicly make. After all, some women are pro-white and anti-Israel themselves. And you only need one woman to like you in order to get laid. Even more moderate women may appreciate that Nick's speaking out against immigration in unusually blunt ways. People don't need to agree with someone on every single point in order to like them. Not to mention that Nick's somewhat famous, self-employed, well-dressed, well-groomed, not bad-looking, confident, he says what he thinks, and he's likely a millionaire. Nick certainly could find someone to sleep with, if he wanted. He just chooses not to. Which means that sex also isn't an incentive for Nick to listen to women. So, I get that people don't like that young men listen to a person with these kinds of views. Especially because Nick also has little incentive to listen to women's concerns, or moderate himself. Still, disliking this doesn't solve anything. Back when Jordan Peterson was the role model for young men, lots of people criticized Jordan for his right-wing views. And did that criticism make young men less right-wing? Not at all. In fact, Jordan's "Be a Responsible Husband" brand of conservatism looks angelic in comparison to Nick Fuentes' positions, from the perspective of most people. Back when Charlie Kirk was popular, people were acting like he was evil incarnate due to his right-wing Christian views. He was literally assassinated. And did Charlie's assassination cause young men to moderate? Nope. They're listening to Nick Fuentes now. What young men learn from Charlie Kirk's assassination is, if you're a young man and you're reasonable and you try to be a good husband and talk to people, they'll kill you. And then they'll dance on your grave. And they won't take any measures to prevent the next assassination. Hence, just opposing Nick Fuentes isn't going to solve anything. In fact, opposing him without fixing society might create someone even extreme. Nick doesn't advocate for deporting literally all non-white people. However, treat him unfairly enough without fixing society, and the guy who comes after him might. Nick doesn't advocate for banning women from the workplace or university. However, treat him unfairly enough without fixing society, and the guy who comes after him might. For now, older men are holding the Zoomers down, but old men are going to die from old age at some point. Shaming tactics and censorship and outlawing Zoomers' speech and deplatforming them and refusing to hire them into high positions simply isn't going to work when older men die and Zoomers get into power. Because then Zoomers control who gets censored. They're obviously not going to censor themselves. If they censor anyone, they'll censor people who oppose them. The weapons you wield against Zoomers today, they might wield against you when they get into power. Emotional appeals and "us women deserve equal rights" arguments work pretty well on the older men who are currently in power. However, that's not going to work on some Zoomers, who are often hostile to non-traditional women. People already complain about the patriarchy. So why shouldn't young men take away women's right to vote? What are people going to do? Complain about the patriarchy. From young men's perspective, society mistreated them first. Plus, from their perspective, they're merely reverting back to what actually works, as opposed to everyone else who is pushing some ideology that might make things even worse. Centrist men can be kept in check via the threat of calling them a Nazi. However, young men get called Nazis just for being average Trump supporters. So why shouldn't they say Hitler was cool? What are people going to do? Call them Nazis? Nick admits that he's a racist. So you can't control him by calling him a racist. Nick openly says that he doesn't want women to have equal rights. So you can't control him by calling him a misogynist. Finally, I want to thank you for having the courage and perseverance to keep reading too long and possibly uncomfortable messages. Especially because I think too many people in the spiritual community just look away from unpleasant things. The spiritual community has this idea that if you look at low vibration things, then your vibration is lowered too, or then you manifest bad things. This fails to understand that looking away and not knowing what the real world is like will make you subconsciously scared. And being subconsciously scared lowers your vibration too, and manifests undesired things too. Your vibration doesn't just mean what's going on in your conscious mind. It also means what's going on in your subconscious. And if you just look away from the world, then that's really scary for your subconscious because it doesn't know what's going on. Ultimately, you'll be less scared if you actually look reality in the eyes. That doesn't mean you must spend hours per day researching. It doesn't mean you must know every gruesome detail. But it does mean you should know the broad strokes, as I shared in these messages. Frankly, I don't see much difference between, "I won't look at that because it's a conspiracy theory, you see, I'm better than you because I believe in science," versus, "I won't look at that because it's low vibration / divisive / because I choose to focus on love, you see, I'm better than you because I'm more spiritually advanced." In both cases, you have people in survival mode caretaking their own emotional well-being, by not looking at the truth and by elevating themselves above others. Now yes, people in survival mode need to do what they need to do. If you need to survive, you need to survive, and if that means not looking at the truth, then that's what you have to do. I'm just saying that refusing to look at reality isn't that spiritually advanced. Similarly, some spiritual people say that if you don't look at the negative and only focus on the positive, then you are matching your reality to the future you desire, and you are there. Okay, by that logic, people who refuse to look at COVID jabs are harmful evidence and only focused on how COVID jabs would protect everyone, smartly and wisely matched their reality to the future they desired, and hence they automatically arrived at the future where everyone was protected by safe and effective COVID jabs. But of course that didn't happen, and lots of people died or became unwell from the COVID jabs. Even though they matched their reality to the future they desired, didn't look at the negative, jabs being harmful, and only focused on the positive, how jabs would protect everyone. Okay. So clearly that idea of, don't look at the negative, focus on the positive, and then you will automatically arrive in a good future idea doesn't help. Now yes, the love and light path is valid, but it means seeing reality first and then choosing to focus on cultivating and sending out unconditional love. As opposed to the valid alternative, which is seeing reality first and then focusing on practical action. Also, the action path can do spiritual practice and inner work too. The love and light path doesn't have a monopoly on that. You live in a society that is basically on fire. Now yes, it is valid to do the love and light path, which again, means looking at reality first. It is valid to let someone else take the practical action. However, if that's your choice, you have little room to complain that you don't like the actions that other people take. Your house is on fire and someone has to actually go out there and put it out and then build a new house after all. And if you don't take action during these times, then the house will be built, but it might not be built how you want it built. If you want a specific kind of society to be built, you might have to take action yourself. If you actually want to fully do the love and light path fully, go send unconditional love towards white patriarchy, and also go send unconditional love towards an inclusive multicultural future. The love and light path unconditionally sends love to all, without trying to achieve a specific outcome. The idea of, I only love good things, isn't enlightened. That's the consciousness that's been around on Earth for thousands of years already. And you're experiencing right now what that leads to. So if you're an action-oriented person, then look at reality and go take action. If you don't want white patriarchy, then work towards building something better. And occasionally criticizing things is valid, but only ever criticizing things won't build new Earth either. At some point you have to make a realistic plan and then build something. Whereas if you're a love and light-oriented person, then send unconditional love towards everything, without trying to achieve a specific outcome. Yes, even send love towards things you think are evil. And if you can't, it's okay, but then do more inner work. I honor your courage to engage with these ideas, and not just take the easy path where you declare yourself and your in-group to be the only smart and moral ones in the room, while labeling the rest of humanity as evil or immoral or inferior. With all my love, your star sister, Tunia.